on the Tall Mike Wine Podcast.
Welcome, New Zealand. How come nobody ever talks about Old Zealand? Go outside in the fall. The leaves have started falling. There's some evergreen smell, but mostly what you're smelling is like the wet earth.
Truth be told, not my first try.
Are we going to go back to the garage now?
And we're going to go back to the garage. There are these ridiculously big bottles with ridiculously unpronounceable names like
the Jeroboam and the Nebuchadnezzar. One's called a Methuselah.
That's the 900-year-old wine.
And now, the Tall Mike Wine Podcast.
The cell phones have been silenced. The wine has been poured. And just like that, the podcast begins. Welcome to the Tall Mike Wine Podcast, a wine podcast that's not all about wine. The wine podcast like no other. I'm Mike Stone, your host for the podcast, heard in 23 countries on 5 continents. Welcome, New Zealand. How come nobody ever talks about Old Zealand? And in 42 of these United States, from Farmers Branch, Texas, to Wauwatosa, Wisconsin, from Lodi, California, to Hartsville, South Carolina, plus the District of Columbia. Now, I said 42 states. Oh, New Mexico, what's your deal? I happen to have listeners in Old Mexico. I guess you're not that special. Get with the program, come on. On to episode 18, my guest here in the Vintner's Room at Nicholson Ranch Winery in Sonoma, California. He is the first and only multiple episode guest. You could say he's the Alec Baldwin or Steve Martin of this podcast. That's a Saturday Night Live reference. Those two have hosted that show more times than anyone, and my guest is here for his 4th time, the owner and winemaker here at Nicholson Ranch, Deepak Gulrajani. Hello, Deepak. Welcome back.
Hi, good morning. I don't think I can compete with Steve Martin and Alec Baldwin when it comes to the humor and showmanship. But I think when it comes to wine, I think I have a little bit of an edge.
I think you've got a big edge. We are getting close to harvest time. We were recording this on a Friday, and I was told that we were going to start harvesting grapes on Monday. So by the time this podcast is being listened to, we'll have already started harvesting the grapes. It's exciting, right?
Absolutely. Harvest, every day of harvest is exciting, especially day one. There's so much anticipation, preparation, making sure everything goes smooth. There's a lot of planning. It's just super exciting to go out there on day one, which is going to be Monday. We'll be out there at 6:30 in the morning, just before first light.
When he says we, he does not include me in that because that's too early for me.
Everybody has their specialty.
I'm also too tall. Even after 20 years, it's still exciting, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, my career, well, before I got in winemaking, as you guys have heard before, I was in technology and doing software. I was in the finance industry. But that's what gave me the opportunity to make wine at home. And that home winemaking was something that so fascinated me that it became a passion. And it truly has been. So 20 years later, making wine commercially, harvest and making wine is still what excites me and charges me up.
There's still probably part of you that is, it's hard to believe you're doing it, right?
Well, it is and it isn't. I mean, every day I'm just feel very fortunate to do it because I love doing it. And it's hard to believe we're here in wine country, which is gorgeous. Especially this time of the year. The weather is gorgeous. I know most of you have read about all the heat and drought and wildfires and all of that. Somehow this little sliver of California all along the coast seems to have dodged most of that this year.
We're doing well. The sun is shining, blue skies. Speaking of harvest, one last note. I've heard from you and from JC that this is going to be a much smaller harvest. Tell me why.
Yes, it is. Though the weather this year has been wonderful, there's a few things that have happened that have kept the vigor on the vines much lower. Interestingly, though the news is about heat and drought, what hurt us is a frost. Quite the opposite.
Oh, from the winter time.
Yeah, a frost in early winter last year, about the 10th of November, plus or minus. The temperatures went down to between 26 and 28 degrees. It's very unusual that time of year to get that type of frost. We had harvested all the fruit, so there was no damage to the fruit of 2020. but the vines weren't dormant as yet, which means they had sap flowing through them. And especially the little tiny buds that were on there, which would produce the new growth in 2021, were also had a little sap or cellular material in there. They weren't dormant. And so the frost freezes the cells, breaks them open, and really hurts the bud, in some cases destroying the bud. So that frost is what was really challenging for this year, for the plants for this year, where the growth has been much weaker than most years. But the plants also the same way are self-balancing in terms of they have less growth and they put out less fruit. Mm-hmm. So the ratio of amount of leaves that we have, amount of growth that we have to the fruit stays relatively the same. That's good news because we may get less fruit, but the fruit that we get will be as good as we have had in previous years. So that's the good news part of it.
So preview of a 2021 vintage, which will be in bottle in a few years down the road. That won't be as much, but it'll be good.
Yeah, everything I can see and taste, we're tasting the juice. We go and sample let me step back. The way we decide when we're going to pick is by going out and actually sampling a section of the vineyard. Over the years, we know which section ripens the first. It's always our Chardonnay and the Chardonnay that goes into our reserves, primarily into Cuvée Natalie. That's the top of the hill. It ripens first. So Xander, who's my oldest son, is now our primary tester or sampler. He goes out there, picks a bunch of berries from the Cuvée Natalie section only, brings them back to the winery. Xander does all the lab work. Mm-hmm. And once he's done off with all the lab work, Jean-Claude and I taste the juice. So we don't even look at the numbers. I don't look at any lab work at all. I just taste the juice. And the first nose, the first smell, if it smells grapey, it's not ready. The aroma has to go beyond grapes.
Beyond grapes, into all the other beautiful Chardonnay things.
So first, beautiful Chardonnay things turn out to be pear, apple, peach. Our grapes, typically with the grape juice, smells a lot of pear. And then you get a hint of apple and peach. And then you just put it in your mouth, and it has to have the right texture in the mouth as well. And that texture is a combination of the sugar and the acidity. And that's what creates balance for the wine as well. So if it has all those sensory components, then I look at the numbers. And the numbers we're looking at, primarily one is sugar content, which is called Brix, acidity, and then pH. Those are the three numbers you look at. And from the last 20 harvests, we kind of have an idea of what the range of these numbers should be. So we make sure those numbers are within the range. But ideally, I'm only picking on the basis of taste. After doing this for so long, I'm pretty sure we could not have to do the numbers. But my memory nowadays is not so good. So actually measuring the acidity and pH and recording that is very helpful for future vintages and not relying on my memory.
All right, you're making me thirsty with all this talk of these delicious flavors. We are here today to taste the Nicholson Ranch Wine Club wines for the September release. Always a good time to be at the winery when the Wine Club wines are released. It only happens 4 times a year, and with about 2,000 people in the club, there's a bit of a buzz in the air. Let's get to the first wine. The coasters are in place. Tall Mike Wine Podcast coasters only available via email. Send me an email and I'll send you your very own set. Or come visit me at the winery. We are tasting first the 2018 Sonoma Valley Chardonnay. I have the technical data in front of me, and one thing that sticks out about this one as far as the technical information goes is 26 months of aging. This wine isn't typically aged that long, is it?
No, the 2018 vintage turned out to have a little extra time in the barrel. The 3 wines that are there in the wine club shipment, and many of our Nicholson Ranch members receive it, are the 2018 Sonoma Valley Chardonnay, the 2018 Cactus Hill Pinot Noir, and then something that is new and different for us, the 2015 Cabernet. But all these wines had something special going for them, a little extra time in the barrel. And a lot of that had to do with our 2020 COVID year. Mostly, every year actually, all our wines are typically bottled about 22 months after they're harvested, which means the 2018 wines would have been bottled in about June of 2020.
Mm-hmm.
June of 2020, to plan for bottling June of 2020, you start work in February or March. And as all of you know, that's when we were shut down and we didn't quite understand what COVID meant. And so the first thing I did was to postpone the bottling, which was a big deal because there's a lot of components that come together for bottling. You got to order the bottles, the labels, the corks, the foils. You have to have a bottling truck. All the supplies come from different countries. The foils come from Spain, and the corks come from Portugal, and the bottles come from France and Mexico. And the paper for the labels comes from, you guessed it, Canada.
Canada.
They're printed all here, but pretty much all our paper comes from Canada. So it takes months of preparation to have a good bottling. And then once you've prepared all this, actually undoing all of it is not easy. Nevertheless, we didn't want to bottle in June of 2020, and all my suppliers were very kind and allowed me to push it off till November and December of 2020. So that's how these wines got an additional almost 6 months in the barrel.
The two 2018s that we're going to taste today.
The two 2018s got additional time in the barrel. Let's taste it, and then I'll tell you what may have done to it.
Okay. So this is the 2018 Nicholson Ranch Sonoma Valley Chardonnay. This is the one we ferment in stainless steel, and then it spends a little bit of time in oak. It says here it's 28% oak and 72% stainless steel. So did it stay in the stainless steel tank for that long?
So the part of it, the 72% that was fermented in stainless steel, after a few months actually goes into old wine barrels. The reason we do that, the reason we ferment in stainless steel, is to keep more fruit flavors, keep a lot more of the primary aromas that we get from the juice, and not have it influenced by the flavors of oak. But the reason we put it in old wine barrels is to improve the texture of the wine. If we left it in stainless steel, it would be kind of crisp and steely, so to speak. I like the aromas and the fruit flavors that are retained when fermenting, but I like a smoother texture. And so to do that, I put it in old wine barrels, and even old wine barrels will let the wine breathe. And that breathing is what improves the texture. So these old barrels have no flavor left. All the flavor has been sucked out of them by some of our reserve Chardonnays. But the old wine barrels still have a last job to do, which is soften up the texture of our Sonoma Valley Chardonnay.
It's certainly very, very soft on the mouth. Actually, the nose I get initially is a little bit of vanilla. That barrel is not dead yet.
They can be surprising sometimes.
It's not overwhelming.
It can be surprising.
Nobody's going to come along and say this is an oaky Chardonnay.
Yeah.
It's very fruit forward. Lots of lemon. I get some nice pineapple notes, even a little bit of something they talk about with Sauvignon Blanc occasionally, gooseberry. I've never tasted a gooseberry, but I have an idea what they taste like because I've had enough Sauvignon Blanc and read those notes with that wine.
For me, gooseberry is a very distinct flavor and taste. As a young person growing up in India, my aunt used to make gooseberry jam. So I don't think I may have had a fresh gooseberry, but I probably do. I remember it. But my memory is mainly of gooseberry jam. It's great on toast.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
Especially if your aunt makes it fresh. What are you tasting, Deepak?
The hint of sweetness, actually, though there's no sugar in this wine. A lot of lemon, green apple, some bit of pear. This is not as much pear as we'd usually have. I get citrus in the nose as well, and the vanilla that Mike was talking about. The Sonoma Valley Chardonnay is designed, and it is a 2018, is nice and smooth, very refreshing, easy to drink. It's designed to be a perfect daytime wine, sipping wine. That said, these wines last for a very long time.
Wine clubs at wineries, if you're not familiar, are a great way to be on the inside, especially small wineries. Nicholson Ranch does not distribute wine to stores, restaurants, or wine shops, so joining the wine club is the only way to get some of our wines, some of the prized, smaller production wine club only wines. And it's a lot like being a regular at your favorite neighborhood restaurant. You get special treatment. One of Deepak's main responsibilities here at the winery, besides, making the wine, is schmoozing with the wine club members when they come and visit. And he's really good at that.
I'm really good at that because I truly enjoy it. When I started making wine in my garage, I primarily did it to make new friends. Yeah, I liked wine and all of that and figured this was a great thing to do, get your hands dirty. But it was a great way to make new friends outside of my immediate world of technology. And that feeling of that friendship and camaraderie that came with winemaking has always stayed with me. I drank wine with friends. We did formal wine tasting with friends. And so today as well, I really enjoy talking to everybody who comes through, but especially the wine club members, because it's a continuing conversation with wine club members. Wine club members, some come once a year, some come every 6 months. But it's like catching up with them, and it's like family, and we catch up over what's going on in our lives. And so it's always very interesting. The second part that's interesting is meeting new people. And so I know a lot about different parts of the world without having visited those parts of the world at all, or different parts of the United States as well. And this is by talking to people who come visit. All our visitors and our wine club members are just generally very gregarious, very knowledgeable, and just generous with their time and willing to share with me their experiences. And I get to vicariously travel all to the 42 states and more, and to 5 continents, including New Zealand.
That's right.
Without ever physically having gone to New Zealand.
That reminds me of a story. Wine club members. I got a call from a wine club member the other day. Not uncommon. I spend a few hours a week in the office here taking calls, helping people with their wine club needs. Anyway, this wine club member had purchased some cases of wine and wanted to pick them up and asked if she could come by that day. I said, of course. And then she asked me if I was wearing one of my shirts. Now, the shirts she was referring to are the typical shirts I wear when working here at the winery. Some might call them loud. I prefer to say they are well-patterned. I'm wearing one right now. Now, it gets interesting. She told me her husband had bought a few of the shirts. I'm not secretive about where the shirts come from. They come from a company called Johari West. And what's most important to me, besides the patterns and colors, is that the shirts come in a tall size. Important for me, tall Mike wine, right? So now a question, Deepak. What would you think if I approached the Johari West people about sponsoring the podcast? I've sold a few shirts just mentioning the brand here at the winery. Maybe I could create a whole sensation, get a little financial support for the podcast. What do you think?
Go right ahead. Johari can sell more shirts. They're definitely going to sponsor you.
Johari West. We ready for some Pinot?
I've got one delicious sip.
Well, don't rush yourself.
Of Chardonnay here.
I'm going to get some good sound effects here.
And this is actually, we're working, but it's about 11:30 in the morning. Maybe I should be careful on how much I'm sipping right now. But it is Friday.
It's Friday.
It's Friday after all.
It's a nice day. It's not going to be too terribly busy here. You've already had some nice meetings with your winemaking crew about what's going to happen on Monday. We're going to move on to the next wine now. It's the 2018 Cactus Hill Pinot Noir. This is probably our most well-known wine, probably the most popular wine Deepak has ever made. And it's a pretty small production wine. This one, according to the data sheet, is 583 cases. And this spent 27 months in French oak. 56% of the barrels were new. That's pretty typical for the Cactus Hill, except for that 27 months in barrel, which, as we explained, was because of the COVID shutdown. So here we are with the Cactus Hill.
As usual, the Cactus, the aromas are just captivating, and there's just layer and layer of spice, floral, and fruit aromas in the wine.
Yeah, it's not as fruit forward on the nose. It actually, the first thing you get is that sort of spicy, dusty, spicy smell. Kind of like you go to your grandma's house and she's got all the spices in the cupboard. Maybe not your grandma's house, Deepak, because she would have a lot of Indian spices in the cupboard.
Yeah.
That might be different than my grandma's house. And I'm thinking more like spices of an indeterminate type. You just get that waft of that when you open the cupboard. That's the first thing I get. Then we get into the cherry smells. Kind of a maraschino cherry I'm getting first. Cactus Hill typically for me is just layer upon layer upon layer. Here comes the maraschino. Okay, here comes the Bing cherry. Okay, here comes the choke cherry.
Nice spice on this. A lot of like cinnamon, clove, nutmeg. A lot of baking spices. But then immediately you get that cherry aroma even. When you sip on it, it's a cherry raspberry cocktail. And there's lots of acidity in this wine. So it's kind of lip smacking. It extends the finish, so the flavor lingers.
If you're sipping along with us, just take note after you swallow the wine, what happens in your mouth. Because this wine is making my mouth water. And that is called the finish. And this wine has an amazing finish. I'm just awash right now in saliva. And that's a good thing.
Yeah. This wine definitely has that extended length. So it's very enjoyable right now as we're sipping it. Mm-hmm. But I'm also kind of thinking through, is like, how is this wine going to evolve? Currently at the tasting room, we're again pouring the 2014 Cactus Ale, which has probably reached the peak of perfection. Mm-hmm. That's good news and kind of bad news. The good news is, because it's a peak of perfection, it's got great aroma, great flavor, and excellent texture. The acidity has softened up. The tannins are softened up, so it's extremely smooth on your palate. And it's like something you just wanted to stay on your palate. You don't even want to swallow the wine. The bad news is, that's about the best this wine's going to be. It's got nowhere to improve, which is fine. But, it's good to recognize that, so that the 2014 Cactus, it'll probably stay that way for a year or two, but probably would not hold much longer.
Time to drink up.
Yeah.
2014s.
But it's a real lesson for the 2018. I'm going, wow, 3-4 years from now, this may hit that peak of perfection as well.
Right.
I like it right now, and it's extremely lip smacking, but as it evolves, it will soften up. The acidity may not be as lip smacking, but the flavors may not be as strong. But something about that combination, that time is kind of integrated in there, makes it just a different sensation, where you're not specifically talking about all the components of aroma, flavor, and acidity. In an older wine, it just tastes good.
The flavors come together and start sprouting new flavors. People that are really into wine call those the secondary and tertiary flavors that really only come out once the wine has time to age in the bottle. Right now we're drinking a wine that has some really nice primary flavors to it. That's why everything's so bright and vivid.
Yeah.
That's fun about being here at the winery, is that we have all the different vintages, and occasionally we get to taste this vintage and that vintage of the exact same wine, and it's really fun.
The 2018 vintage, many consider to be among the best vintage in the, what do we call this decade?
I don't know.
The last decade, sorry.
Oh,
the
tens. I call it, the
Not
teens.
The odds.
The teens.
Is it the teens? Okay.
The teens, right?
Teens and the tweens. The teens. In the teens decade, many consider 2018 to be the best year for Pinot Noir. I'm not in that category to say it's the best year. It's a really good year, because we've had some really good years quite almost all through. And I'd go back as far back as 2012. From 2012 to 2018, which is bottled right now, I wouldn't really pick a favorite vintage. I'd take any one of those. And don't take my word for it. Our wines go out for reviews, and the Wine Spectator has given 92 points to the Cactus Hill for the last 3 years in a row, including the 18, which some consider the best vintage. We've got high scores for 16, 17. Prior to that, we had high scores for the 14 and 15. It may be, our wines are just very consistent, And much of that consistency has to do with the vineyard being of a certain age. The vineyard is at middle age, the prime of its life. It's at 25, 26 years. That's middle age. For some of the Chardonnay, maybe kind of it's like getting a little gray hair on it. So it's kind of getting to the other end of it. But definitely as the plants hit middle age, they are kind of self-sufficient, just uniquely expressive. Just as many of us, I think I was probably not as interesting a person as I was in my 20s as I may be today. The grapevines are pretty similar in that way, that they get much more expressive, much more interesting as the vine itself ages. So I think a lot of the consistency has to do with that. The second part of it is winemaking, which is myself and my winemaking team have been doing this for a number of years. My whole team has been with me for 12 years now. And so our processes and what we do over here has remained largely the same. The environment in which we make the wines is the same. Mm-hmm. And a big component of that environment is our underground cellars, our caves. So these wines were aged for 26 months in those underground cellars. So that has, the cellar, the cave has a big imprint on the wine. And that is true for every vintage. Those three components really contribute to having consistency.
Well, I mean, going back to choosing a year from a decade and dubbing it the best, that's something that, wine writers get paid to do. Mm-hmm. And it's very subjective. So people come here and they ask all the time, what's the best year? I say, well, everybody's got their own ideas about what the best year is. The good news about that is they're all really good years. There aren't any bad years. That's the opposite end of the spectrum. Nobody ever says, what was the worst year?
So from a winemaking as a personal narrative, 2017, just because it was really, really hot.
Yes.
And the fires came all the way to Nicholson Ranch. Mm-hmm. Most of you know the story. Fortunately, we survived. The building survived. So from that point of view, I would say worst year. But then when I open a bottle of 2017 and drink it, like I said, the Cactus Hill 2017, as good as a
There's
2018 that we have in there.
Luckily, 2017, back in the old days of the wine country wildfires, they used to come back in October after harvest.
Yeah.
Now we have fires in July and August.
Talking about the fires, the question I get a lot is how is it affecting? Is it affecting us? How is it affecting us? Fortunately, this year's fires are 150, 200 miles away. So the immediate flames, certainly we have no danger at all. However, there is haze and smoke in the air and has been for the last couple of weeks. And smoke can affect the grapes and affect the wine. We got a real lesson in that last year in 2020.
We sure did.
Where the fires were much closer. Again, we had no danger from the flames, but being 25 miles away from the main fire, the smoke was noxious out here. We've all became experts in AQI, Air Quality Index.
Watching those purple dots on the map.
So just as we may be watching the temperature and all of that, we started watching AQI. And last year, the AQI was very often over 250, which would be hazardous conditions. So we got to learn a lot more of, what can happen? And we did a lot of tasting and testing and making sure the grapes weren't infected by the smoke or smoked. And fortunately, our grapes turned out all clean. So this year, where though we've had some haze and smoke, the AQI is maybe hovered at about 100. Not great, but certainly not hazardous. Fortunately, from the education I got last year, I don't have any concern for the grapes or the wine we're going to make this year.
That's good news. It is sad news out of the Lake Tahoe area, though, day to day. I want to go backwards a bit here and thank my guest from episode 17, BJ Gandhi from Cascadia Wine Merchants. She was great. And she and I had some fun with the social media. We did some crossover promotions. This is a thing that people do, Deepak, on the social media. She posted some nice pictures of our recording session on the Cascadia Instagram account. In fact, she posted a contest in honor of her appearance on the podcast. So in order to increase your followership on, say, Instagram, you can run a contest. Say, here's a contest we're going to give away. In her case, she gave away a bottle of that delicious wine from Poplar Grove that we tasted on the podcast. She said, what you have to do is you have to go on Mike's Instagram and follow him and make sure you're following Cascadia, and then you're entered in the contest. So I got some new Instagram followers, one of whom won the contest, who was also a wine club member here at Nicholson Ranch. Ratch and Karen Reshaw won the contest. So Congratulations to them.
They were just here early in the week. We were just catching up. Yeah, Ratch just retired.
Oh, good for him.
He just retired. So I was like, how are you keeping busy? So he has a long list of honeydew projects. That's for sure.
All right, we're going to go on to the third wine now. The third wine is quite the outlier, quite the interesting story here among the wines made at Nicholson Ranch.
Oh, don't rush me, Mike. I'm enjoying the Cactus Hill.
Take your time, Deepak. Take your time. I'm gonna pour a little of this next wine for me and get a little sound effect. The next wine is a Cabernet Sauvignon, and the label on the bottle is, to say the least, a bit odd here at Nicholson Ranch, where when people come to the winery, we tout the fact that we make all of our wines from grapes that we grow on this property. Hence, we get to put the little word estate on every bottle because we do the grape growing, we do the winemaking, we do the barrel aging, and we do the bottling on this property. The next wine does not feature the word estate. It actually has different words than are on any of the bottles here at Nicholson Ranch. The words Napa Valley.
It's the only Nicholson Ranch wine which has the words Napa Valley on it.
And the only one ever, and the only one that ever will, right?
We'll tell you about the ever will, but I make wine from everything that I grow on Nicholson Ranch, and as everybody knows, Chardonnay and Pinot is what our weather is best suited for. Cabernet would not ripen fully over here, and the best Cabernet comes from Napa. About 6 years ago, 2015, is when I went looking for a Napa Cabernet vineyard. I spent a few months doing this. Course of that, the 2 or 3 vineyard people that I talked to were willing to sell me barrels of the 2015 wine, which had just been barreled. And I thought about it and said, this is a good way to get to know these vineyards, get to know what these vineyards can actually do, and then subsequently look at engaging the vineyard owners to see if anybody wants to sell a vineyard. So that's how I acquired 11 barrels of wine from 2 of these 3 different people, but it was actually turned out to be from 4 different vineyards, all on the eastern side of Napa Valley. From the south end is called the Coombsville Appellation, and then as you go up Silverado Trail, Stag's Leap, Yountville, Rutherford. So it has many different appellations all on the eastern side.
That's an all-star cast right there.
Definitely really, really good vineyards and great appellations. So I ended up blending the wines, aging them for a much longer time, tasting them, making sure, they suited my palate and kind of my style of wine. So this is the first Cabernet from Nicholson Ranch.
You went out to, in essence, buy a vineyard in 2015 and did not buy a vineyard, but you bought freshly made barrels of wine. Is that a thing that happens?
I guess so.
I've never been in the market to buy a vineyard, so I can't.
It must, because there's a lot of people involved in the vineyard business. I know it's also incredibly rare for a Sonoma person to go and buy a vineyard in Napa and make Cabernet. There's probably just a handful of people who are more Pinot specialists that even make a Cabernet, and almost all of them probably just purchase fruit. To some extent, that's true of me, at least for this wine. There's a second part to this whole story, and we'll come to that in a minute.
We're going to get to that in just a moment. But first, I'll share the technical data. This is a Cabernet Sauvignon from the 2015 vintage. As Deepak said, the grapes come from all over the Napa Valley. And how long did it spend in barrel? 22 months. And a little over half the barrels were new. So you bought some barrels that were not new. Not new oak.
Not new oak.
Not the wine when the wine was put in it. What are you smelling, Deepak?
Interesting. Like my first note was I was thinking of coffee.
Okay. My first note was kind of a wet, earthy note. You go outside in the fall, the leaves have started falling. There's some evergreen smell, but mostly what you're smelling is like the wet earth. That was the first smell that I got. Is that too vivid?
The flavors are like rich red fruit, plum, fig. That's not really red fruit, but on the richer side of fruit. Very dark currants.
Yes.
It's got a spiciness, but it's like hard for me to put a finger on what spice.
I get like a little bit of bell pepper, just a tiny bit.
Bay leaf, and that's probably what
good.
you're getting.
Okay.
I get is bay leaf, but
I'm also getting a really like warm, almost cocoa-like. And usually that's something I get on the nose, but I'm actually getting it on the palate here. It feels like, ooh, that's almost chocolatey. For your first try at Cabernet, you did pretty good, Deepak.
Truth be told, not my first try.
Okay. Oh.
And my first commercial try.
Are we going to go back to the garage now?
We're going to go back to the garage. So in the garage days, I made every varietal. It was just because every year we'd go, oh, let's try something different.
Right.
But we did make Cabernets for quite a few different years. The year I specifically remember was 1995, because that's the year my oldest son, Xander, was born. And I wanted to make a wine that would last 21 years. So it was like Cabernet can last. So I made Cabernet and bottled a lot of it in magnums. Wine ages much longer in a magnum than it would in a regular bottle. The bigger the bottle is, the slower the wine will age. So it'll last much longer.
Yes.
And that's the reason there are these ridiculously big bottles with ridiculously unpronounceable names like
the Jeroboam and the Nebuchadnezzar.
Exactly. Thank you for pronouncing for me, because I can never get it right.
I love all those names. I love them. One's called a Methuselah.
That's the 900-year-old wine.
The 1995 Deepak Garage Cabernet Sauvignon. Did Xander get to taste some of that on his 21st birthday?
Yes, he did. That was expressly. But as of finding out, now having 3 kids that have turned 21 over the years, though it's incredibly special to me, it doesn't seem incredibly special to them. Maybe at age 21, they don't have the wine. They may have the wine palate, but at 21, I can't say I had an appreciation for time. At age 59, and today, I have much more appreciation for time. And I think that's the biggest difference.
Yeah, 21-year-olds, their priorities might be a little different.
Yeah, but the other charming thing about wine is, you can taste the wine, which was made 21 years back. So it is bottled memories in some sense as well.
This cab is delicious, and it's going to keep aging. We tasted this. I remember I started working here in 2017, and at some point was made aware that there was a Cabernet. And I drink a lot of Cabernet. So eventually, a few years go by, and I get a chance to taste the Cabernet. And initially, when I tasted it probably 2 years ago, I thought, okay, this is really not ready. But once we started tasting it last year, it started to come around, and we sent it out as an option for the wine club in November to buy for the holiday season. And the feedback was good, so it's out in this shipment currently. It's now really starting to hit that drinking window. It's ready to go, but it's going to keep going. You talked about the 2014 Cactus Hill being amazing, but it's time to drink up the next few years. This cab is just hitting that like, oh, it's amazing now, it's ready to drink, and you got at least another 7 or 8 years left with this wine.
You're exactly right in terms of it's ready to drink right now. It finally softened up. We did like a little special release last November, and the wines were really good. I think it's got better in the past year.
It totally has. Since November, when we were tasting it for that, it's definitely gotten better. That was before I was a podcast host, though. That's before I really knew anything.
Yeah. We learn every day.
That's right.
We learn every day.
All right, now the big reveal. Deepak did not buy a vineyard in 2015, even though he went around and kicked a few tires. But in the year 2020, when a lot of things were different, Deepak went shopping again and did buy a Napa Cabernet vineyard.
This was happenstance. I really wasn't looking for a vineyard in 2020. Yeah, I was looking for a vineyard a few years back. But when our 2017 fires hit here at Nicholson Ranch, after that, I was just grateful that we didn't burn down to the ground. And I was like, just be grateful for what you have. Enjoy it. Sit back. You don't need to do more. And so I pushed the thought of adding a Cabernet vineyard completely off my mind. So in 2020, I got introduced to this vineyard in Yountville. I went to take a look at it. And I liked the look of the vineyard. It's a hillside vineyard. And the vineyard's only 7 acres. The property itself is gorgeous. The property is 40 acres. Most of it wooded oak hillside. So not property that you could plant the vineyards, but it looks really good. But the 7 acres of vineyard that existed over there looked great. I had the opportunity to taste wines that were made from this vineyard over a whole decade plus. And I really loved the wines. So that's what really intrigued me. I'm going, doesn't happen very often. I know I don't want to buy a vineyard. I don't need to grow. I'm happy with what I'm doing. But it was an exceptional property, exceptional vineyard. I looked at many ways to say no. Somehow everything just clicked on this, and it just was a really, really good fit. Actually, not what I wanted to do. It gave me a vision of what I could do.
Okay.
Really.
So in 2015, you didn't find a vineyard, but in 2020, a vineyard found you.
Yeah, that's probably appropriate. It's also like my winemaking career. I think the winemaking career found me more than me finding the winemaking career.
It's like a lot of things in life. And now that I'm a little older than a lot of people, you counsel people about, say, their love lives. People say, oh, I'm trying to find a girlfriend. I'm trying to find someone. I'm like, you know what? You're going to find the best person for you when you stop looking. And then that person will just emerge when you're ready.
Sage advice.
The world will send that person to you.
Sage advice for girlfriends
lucky.
and vineyards.
So the vineyard found you. Let's talk about the name of the new estate.
The new Yountville estate is named Gulrajani, which is my last name. It honors all my forebearers and hopefully successors. And it is focused on just making wines from that estate. The 7 acres over there are split up between 4.5 acres of Cabernet Sauvignon and 2.5 acres of Sangiovese. The Sangiovese itself is interesting. There's not a lot of Sangiovese planted in Napa Valley. There's only about 100 acres of Sangiovese in Napa Valley. There's probably more than 20,000 acres of Cabernet. But Sangiovese is doubly interesting because it makes super Tuscan wines and other Tuscan wines.
Brunello di Montalcino.
Brunello di Montalcino. Exactly, is one of the best Sangioveses that come out of Tuscany. Coincidentally, I got married in Tuscany in 2019.
Oh, it's all coming together now.
And one of the best days of our honeymoon we spent was in Montalcino, where Brunello di Montalcino comes from. Trust me, when I was honeymooning out there, I wasn't thinking about wine, at least in the professional sense. Mm-hmm. We were drinking a lot of wine, we were eating a lot of food, but we were just having a good, relaxing time. I was not talking to winemakers and finding out how they were growing Sangiovese or how they were making Super Tuscans. No, I was just drinking and enjoying it.
It was just you going out into the universe and enjoying things, and eventually the vineyard found you.
Yeah, so that's an amazing coincidence as well. So from this vineyard, under the Gulrajani Estate label, we're making a Cabernet. We're making a Sangiovese, which I named Sanjaya, which means victory in Hindi. And then we make a third wine, which is a blend of Cabernet and Sangiovese. So in honor of Super Tuscans, it's a blend of the power of Cabernet and the nuance and the aroma of Sangiovese. And I have named it Narasimha, which is an Indian avatar, part lion, part man. So I thought it was a great representation for representing the power and the nuance. And you know who found the name? Tall Mike Wine. The name.
You know what appealed to me about that name was the wine. Okay, the wine is a blend. Cool. This avatar has a cool name and is a blend, man and lion. I thought, if you could find an image of that, you could put it on the label. And that'd be really cool. Maybe that'll come along one day.
Yeah, no, one day that label will come along. I was more focused on making sure blending a wine which really represented that. It represented just a lot of structure, which a Cabernet is going to bring, the longevity, which a Cabernet is going to bring, but at the same time, a little more approachable between the aroma and the acidity which Sangiovese brings.
And of course, there'll be a Cabernet.
Yep. And the third wine, of course, was 100% Cabernet, which is the dominant, the most large production, which may happen to be 400 cases eventually. This year, we think we're going to do 100 cases of Cabernet. You could call this a micro winery. At Nicholson Ranch, we make about 5,000 cases of wine, and we're a very small boutique, and everybody who's tasted the wine has visited here, and this is the only place you can purchase the wine and join the wine club. And the Gulrajani will be even smaller, will be less than 1,000 cases when it comes to full bloom.
And there's no tasting room, but there is a website. You can check it out at gulrajaniestate.com. And there's a wine club there, too. Deepak, you're a podcast veteran now. 4 times here on my podcast. Have you been a guest on any other podcasts?
No.
No? Okay. Do you listen to podcasts?
I wouldn't say I listen to podcasts, but the podcast I got interested in was the Bruce Springsteen Obama podcast.
Oh, tell me about that. I haven't listened to any of it. It was a real huge thing when they rolled it out, and I never got around to checking it out.
Both are like idols,
sure,
in that sense, but a conversation between them surprisingly wasn't something that turned out to be as interesting. And I don't know why. Of course, I would probably pay to be in the room with the two of them.
Sure. If they were doing like a City Arts and Lectures,
Yeah.
Obama interviews Springsteen, or Springsteen interviews Obama, they're going to pack the house. They could probably pack the house for a month of dates.
I don't know. I didn't get hooked onto it.
Thanks for being my guest. Thanks for hanging out.
You're welcome.
Here in the Vintner's Room. The Tall Mike Wine Podcast was conceived, is written, edited, produced, and maintained by yours truly. And yes, I'm still the janitor. For feedback, to request your very own set of Tall Mike Wine Podcast coasters, suggest a guest, ask a wine question, or any sort of question really, send me an email. That's tallmikewine@gmail.com. Follow me on Instagram. See pictures of me and Deepak here in the Vintner's Room. That's at Tall Mike Wine. And that is episode 18. Thanks for hanging out. It means a lot to me. Don't forget to rate us and write a review if you're listening on Apple Podcasts. From Nicholson Ranch Winery in beautiful Sonoma, California, I'm Mike Stone. Cheers.